There we go. So, I'm Chris. I know many of you know me, but I thought I'd introduce myself as well. So, I'm going to be doing the sermon today for Adam, and I thought that I would title my sermon, Trusting God Even When He's Asleep. So that's going to be kind of my focus. I'm going to mainly look at the reading from the Gospel. And I thought, being a teacher, let's revisit prior learning. Let's go back to last week. So following on from last week, Jesus has just spoken to people on the Sermon on the Mount. Really, really big event in the Bible. It's kind of up there on the greatest hits of Jesus CD. And there had been thousands and thousands of people there, so much so that Jesus had to go up onto a hillside. And so many people started kind of following Jesus and the disciples after hearing his words, because they're very, very powerful words. So Jesus, along with his disciples, they take a boat and they decide to go over to the other side, over to the other shore, for Jesus to carry on preaching. And at this point, it's not just Jesus who's on the lake, it's also many, many other people in boats who are going across too. So think of it a bit like a first century AD sort of pop star, a bit like Taylor Swift with a better beard. And so people were following Jesus and the disciples around. And so they go onto the lake with him. So a lot is at stake in this reading. And then suddenly this great storm starts to come up. And Jesus becomes tired after his preaching, as you would. And so he settles down in the boat to have a little bit of kip. And it's said that he falls asleep on the stern on a pillow, which is a detail I particularly like. So a gale blows in, and the disciples begin to get a bit worried that their lives are in danger. But it's actually a little bit more than a bit worried. Luke goes so far as to say to Jesus, "We are perishing. Like, we are going to die. The waves are coming into the boat. They will surely be sunk." I think it's clear here that it's not just a storm. It's not just a little bit of bad weather. But this is like a serious weather event that makes even fishermen, people who are aware of the sea, understand the nature of the waves, fear for their lives. Because, of course, the disciples, some of them are fishermen. It was at this point that, unfortunately, I got a little bit distracted, and I had to go and research whether the disciples were boaty fishermen or whether they were landy fishermen. Because I think in my mind, it had always been that when Jesus came up to them, they were like at the shore casting some nets. But anyway, I put into Google, what sort of fishermen were the disciples? Did they have boats? And apparently there's some people who obviously spend a lot of time working out these things. And so it turns out that they say that Peter, Andrew, James and John, as well as his father Zebedee, had access to fishing boats. And that Jesus, in the Bible, often uses boats for transport. And, of course, a fishing boat would make sense as sort of a humble and an everyday kind of mode of transport. Here, by the way, as part of my procrastination on doing the sermon, here's a boat from about that time, about 100 BC, that was found in the Sea of Galilee. And there's a modern-day version of it. So, not a big boat. It's a boat that could easily be sunk by a storm. So, quite clearly, for even fishermen to be scared, this was an event that made them feel so fearful. It shows you how dangerous this was for the people on board. And there are various translations of Matthew, Mark and Luke's account of this squall. There's different versions that say a windstorm, a tempest, a fierce storm. So all of those words kind of sum up what they were going through. Survival was looking unlikely. The kind of extremity of this event can leave the reader in kind of no doubt that this isn't just a bit of bad weather. This is perhaps something sent by a higher power. But my question is, why would God send such an event to his most ardent followers, the people who follow him the most? Why push them to such a point of deep-set fear? If I were to ask you to picture what weather would kind of sum up or personify being closest to God, what would you go for? Would you go for a crisp spring day bursting with new life? Perhaps an ancient forest with a nice calming river? Or maybe my personal favourite, a desert island, preferably no people there, on a sunny day, lovely beach, maybe with a drink, and with one of those little umbrellas in it perhaps as well. God seems to be closest in the Bible, not in these places. The places where God tends to meet people in the Bible, they don't tend to be places of sunshine and endless peace. They tend to be places where there's storms, people on exposed mountaintops, when people are in deserts and starving. I think one version of this reading could certainly be that being a Christian isn't all sunshines, happy lands, cocktails on the beach, at least not in our worldly state. Being a Christian is still really challenging. It is not a magic bullet to make our lives better all the time. The disciples didn't have it easy. They gave up much. And spoiler, it doesn't end too well for the disciples, even after Jesus' death. And they were frequently challenged, they were in constant danger, and following God did not bring the disciples an easy life, both during and after Jesus' life. So, in this passage, the believers didn't sail across a perfectly flat sea, whilst the non-believers were dashed upon the rocks. That would be almost a Disney version of what's going on. It's, of course, also significant that Jesus is sleeping. Sleeping. Like, that doesn't happen often. We read so little of Jesus' actual humanness that this is the only time in the Bible where Jesus is recorded as sleeping. And during a life-threatening storm. Okay, that's the time that Jesus is going to go to sleep, of course it is. So, in the disciples' deepest fears and doubt in that moment, they worry that Jesus is going to do nothing. Jesus is going to stay asleep, and that they will all perish. The disciples decide, we've got to hurry up, we've got to go and awake Jesus. And they beg him to help. After calming the storm, Jesus' reply, "Where is your faith?" rings deeply within us all. He's not telling off the disciples. He's reminding them that even when it seems all is lost and you feel ignored by God, he is still there and he has the power to calm the storm. And it is the calming of the storm that almost brings more fear in the disciples than the storm itself. The fact that this person can do that to them. And this is what I like to take away from this reading. It's really, really easy to trust God when life's going swimmingly. We all have our storms to face, but God is there for us during them. Perhaps not always in the ways we might expect. But God can respond with love and an understanding that can cut through our doubts and fears. Because we all have them. We all fear something. We all doubt ourselves or doubt what's going on in our lives. Even those as close as to know Jesus closely show their doubts and fear. And even they show treachery when their life gets hard. That's part of being human. They felt that God did not care for them, was ignoring them, was asleep when they needed him the most. But Jesus' actions in calming the storm are not a message that God will always just take away all that is bad, but that he is still there for you, even if you don't feel his presence closely. Religion is sometimes somewhat glibly described as a crutch. Something that can limit our expression or might negate our critical thinking, or might be a kind of polyfilla for our trauma. But religion can be a crutch for us. But someone who has faith doesn't just see religion as a kind of a magic filler for the difficult challenges in life. They might understand that God is there no matter what. Jesus travels with the disciples, and God is there for us on the great days and on the not so great days. There is another reading in the Bible that I think links in really well. There's a promise of God to us in Isaiah 43. And it says, "Do not be afraid, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. And I think that links in really, really well with the reading that we've had today. God is there to help us. But I think much more than that, there is another story that links in nicely too. One of my favourites, of course, the parable of St. Christopher. That also goes to remind us that helping others through difficult times is not just something that God can do. So again and again, throughout our religious stories we're aware of, we've got water, rivers, seas coming up again and again. And those links, I think, help join the dots. So not just God can help people in times of difficulty, but also us Christians too. St. Christopher was an ordinary person, and he helped Jesus across the river, although he didn't, of course, know that it was Jesus. And it's something that us Christians can all do for each other as well. I think that is the message from some of these stories, is that, yes, God can help us, but as Christians, we're much stronger together. So God's love is there for us when we face our biggest fears. It won't take those fears away, but it will certainly be there to help us. But just like a crutch for a broken leg, it doesn't have to be something that we always lean and depend on forever. Like the crutch helps our bones heal more quickly, we can heal more quickly from life's storms with God's support and God's people's support and the love and care of others. Gives us the opportunity for us to face our fears and keep travelling onwards. And then we can help others too. Many Christians will be familiar with the poem Footprints in the Sand. And I'd like to finish off my sermon today by reading it. I think when I was thinking about what to preach on, this kind of sums up with simplicity and clarity far better than I can probably manage relating to the reading. So I'll read it now. One night, I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were 2 sets of footprints. Other times there was only 1. During the low periods of my life, I could see only 1 set of footprints. So I said, "You promised me, Lord, that you would walk with me always. Why, when I needed you most, have you not been there for me?" The Lord replied, "The times when you have seen only 1 set of footprints, my child, is when I carried you." So, Lord, I pray that we may all recognise that you are there for us to support us when we face our fears. Strengthen us and help us to turn to you in faith. And in typical teacher fashion, I didn't want to talk for too long, so hopefully that has given enough time for Adam to do his thing. So thank you for listening, and I'll leave it there.